The Alberta Rockies feed the headwaters of various rivers, including the Old Man, Crow's Nest, and Castle rivers. Many of us living here in southern Alberta see a lot of these waters, if not every day, then often during our weekend excursions to the mountains and foothills. The watershed is vital for life in our region, not only supplying drinking water, but also water needed to feed our livestock and crops. Now, there's a group working to protect these waters called the Old Man Watershed Council. Shannon Frank is with the council and joins us today here in Lethbridge. Shannon, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you very much.
Now, so many of us here in southern Alberta enjoy the waters flowing from the Rockies on our weekends and exploring, but many of us also don't realize that groups like yours look out for the quality of this local watershed. Can you explain?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for having me. The Old Man Watershed Council is a registered charity and nonprofit based in Lethbridge, and we're a collaborative forum working with everybody in the watershed. So we have 19 sectors on our board, and it's all about working together to protect the watershed and make sure that it's healthy enough to support our industries and our communities so that we can enjoy the benefits now, but also for future generations. As a nonprofit, we do a lot of work with all levels of government, our First Nations communities, our cities, our towns, and basically everyone. No matter who you are, you have a role to play. And our goal is to really engage people from all walks of life so that our whole community is committed to protecting watershed health.
So, Shannon, can you really educate us as to what a watershed is and why it's so important?
A watershed is an area of land that all drains into a common water body. So in this case, the Old Man River. But it can be at a smaller scale, like the Crow's Nest River watershed, or it can be at a larger scale, like the Hudson Bay watershed that we are a part of, because our river flows east through the prairies to Lake Winnipeg and into Hudson's Bay. So everything that's happening on that land actually impacts the nearby creeks and rivers and lakes, and it all comes together. And so that's the idea of the watershed is a part of all of that land and all of the people on that land. So we all have to work collaboratively to protect it.
Now, when you actually look at a map, the watershed can look a little similar to the circulatory system of the human body. Do you think that's kind of a good comparison?
Yeah, for sure. Like in our bodies, everything's working together to keep us healthy. Similarly, with the watershed, we have to work together, and our rivers and our lakes and our creeks work together to maintain ecological function and habitat and filtering water and that sort of thing, so that everything is definitely connected. And that's why it's so important that us as humans are doing our part to support the natural ecosystems and the fish and the wildlife and the trees, because we are all connected and we depend on each other to have this function so that we can enjoy the benefits of that, like clean water, clean air, and healthy, abundant wildlife, and so on.
So, like a human body, a watershed could become sick or even misaligned?
Yeah, exactly. We've seen instances of this where there could be a spill or too much pollution or, too much land disturbance, and a watershed can become unhealthy. And we can do assessments to see what the health is. So we have indicators in science that we use to assess. In our last report was in 2010, was a very large scale state of the watershed report. We gave ratings of good, fair, and poor to each major section of the watershed: the prairies, the mountains, the foothills, and the southern tributaries. And we find there is a range. Some areas are healthier than others, and some really need our attention.
Now, the Old Man watershed, Shannon, may start in the mountains west of Lethbridge, but how far east feels the impact of this watershed?
Well, it meets up with the Bow River at the the forks just outside Grassy Lake, and from there becomes the South Saskatchewan River. So, it does flow quite far all through Alberta and southern Alberta, and then into Saskatchewan, Lake Winnipeg, and then out to Hudson's Bay. So a large area is impacted, and we are at the top, we're at the headwaters. So, we do have a bit of an extra responsibility to maintain the health and function so that everybody downstream benefits and can enjoy those same necessities that we rely on. So as more creeks and rivers flow in, our impact might be diluted a little bit along the way by other water coming in, but we certainly are at the headwaters, which are the most important source for Western Canada.
It sounds like the lives of millions of people depend on this water that flows through many parts of Alberta. Let's talk about more specifically who relies on the watershed.
Of course. So we all do, right? Like our cities and towns withdraw our drinking water from nearby creeks and rivers. And then we put back our wastewater into those same creeks and rivers. So, we're literally using it day in and day out. And then our whole, like a large portion of our economy in Southwest Alberta is dependent on agriculture, and specifically irrigated agriculture, where we need that water to grow the crops and feed the livestock that, is benefiting our jobs and our economy. So without that, we would have much less jobs and less people would be able to live here, because the industry would just be a lot smaller without irrigation. And in times of drought, like we saw this year, well, I guess last year now in 2021, the drought was very severe for dryland farmers who didn't have irrigation. It's very tough to be a dryland farmer, and we need that water. And there was just an economic study that came out that showed that, billions of dollars come out of the irrigation sector every year. And then also, of course, for our environment, for our fish and our wildlife, our trees, water filtration that we get for free from our wetlands and our ecosystems, the places that we enjoy in the mountains for recreation. It's all dependent on water, and more specifically on the snowpack that we get in the mountains. It's not the rain in the summer so much, it's actually the snowpack in the mountains that we depend on. And so we're always watching, how much is there. The government measures it, they report it because it's so critical.
Let's talk about some of the coal mining in the eastern slopes of the Canadian Rockies. A lot of controversy there. You've even had country stars like Cor Blunt from our area and Paul Brandt getting involved, saying it's going to impact our water quality. The Old Man Watershed Council is dedicated to protecting this watershed. What are your thoughts when it comes to coal mining in the Rockies, how that impacts the water?
We are a resource for decision makers. So we provide unbiased information, scientific research, and concerns and questions that we're hearing from stakeholders. So that's what we did when the coal debate erupted. And we continue to provide information about the potential impacts of coal mining. And we also shared information about some of the positive potential impacts of job creation. And so, our role is not to make judgments, and we don't take sides on large development projects. Our focus is on providing that trustworthy information, and looking at the science to see what we can learn from past research, from past projects. And then we encourage the public and our decision makers to learn from that information and come to their own conclusions. And we provided input directly to the Alberta Energy Regulator and the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. through written submissions and presentations. And so we really pointed out that there could be, significant environmental impacts from coal mining along the eastern slopes. And we also mentioned, that there can be economic benefits. We really try to be a forum for discussion and debate, and similar with any other large project, there's going to be opinions on all sides, and we encourage that discussion based on fact and science.
Now, collaborative projects are an important part of what your council does. Let's talk about some of those collaborations.
For sure. So we work with everybody, and it's all about, trying to encourage everybody to kind of step up and do a little bit more for the benefit of the watershed and the future generations that will be depending on it. So we have a large project in the headwaters where we work directly with backcountry recreationists to adopt good practices, steer clear of water, not driving through the creeks when they're recreating, picking up garbage, leave no trace principles, that sort of thing. And then we also do a lot of restoration projects. So planting willows to reinforce stream banks, planting trees and shrubs to bring back the vegetation in a damaged area so that it can function again. We also have partnerships with our Indigenous communities to do similar work of restoration and engaging communities. Also with farmers and ranchers, we support stewardship projects on private land. A lot of what we do is provide funding for riparian fencing and off-stream watering units so that cattle is kept out of the water, and it also benefits the operation. It means they're not, in a wet area, and they have better weight gain. So, no matter who you are, if you're urban, if you're rural, if you're recreating, there's always something you can do. And so our job is to support those good practices and help people make the good choices and make it easy for them, maybe with some funding or resources.
Do beavers have much of an impact in the Old Man Watershed area?
Yes, beavers are a bit controversial sometimes, but they are a very important part of the ecosystem for holding back water on the land, especially during floods. Those natural beaver dams that they build help us during drought so that there's more water retention on the land, especially wetlands that are connected to groundwater. And they also hold back water in times of flood. So they're very important.
How does the Old Man Watershed Council interact with recreation groups?
We worked collaboratively to educate recreationists, so like attending races and events, talking to them about good practices, things they can do when they're out on the land. I mentioned a few like steer clear of water, and we also promote, putting out your fires. You know, there's a lot of things that recreationists can inadvertently do when they're out there. We don't realize how much impact we have sometimes because we think we're just one person, but we're actually one of thousands that are doing the same thing. So our impact adds up. So we ask people to stay on designated trails, not go through the water, and basically leave no trace.
One more question for you. What about the impact of the watershed on agriculture? Let's talk a bit about that.
Well, the watershed supports agriculture, of course. The soil that is growing the crops and feeding the cattle is critical. We, wouldn't exist without that good soil that we have. And then the water that's feeding the livestock and watering the crops. And it's also, feeding our processing industry. A lot of what we have here is based on the processing side, and we need water for that too. So it's all connected, and we all can do our part to do a little bit more, step up a little bit, to make sure the watershed health is protected.
Shannon Frank is with the Old Man Watershed Council. Shannon, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.